Understanding Gender Diversity. Welcome to Lesson 5, Moving Forward in Our Journey as Advocates for Gender Diverse Youth. In this lesson, we'll consider the work we want to continue to do around understanding our own identities and biases. We'll explore some of the ways misinformation could impact our advocacy for our gender diverse youth. And we'll think about what we want for our own next steps in this journey. One of the first things we want to consider as we move forward in our journey of understanding gender diversity, especially if we want to advocate for our gender diverse youth, is that we must always examine our own implicit binary biases. Implicit biases are the thoughts and feelings inside us that influence how we view other people or events. A binary bias is the societal assumption that ideas, objects, or people are all binary in nature. This bias has a huge impact on the acceptance of gender-expansive people who exist outside of a gender binary. We live in a world where languages are gender binary, where inanimate objects are assigned gender binary pronouns, where paperwork, legal documents, financial transactions, computer parts, bathrooms, and even food are categorized in gender binary ways. That's a lot. So to confront not only our biases, but also our fears of the unknown, we must do a few things like navigate the complexities between our own internal work and the institutions and societal structures we live in. We're always going to be surrounded by these binary biases, but even though we can continue to do the work inside ourselves to try to eliminate them from our own perspectives as much as possible. Next, we can continue to examine and question our own implicit biases in different situations where we find ourselves. We need to grapple with those biases and also model for young people in our lives how to confront them. This is an important process and creates a growth mindset for all of us. And finally, having humility, curiosity, and grace with ourselves and others helps us to be continuous learners as we navigate our journey through this complex world. Here are some other ways we can think about how to build our skills in advocating for our gender diverse youth. First, we must be on the lookout and recognize the fear-based narratives in our society and all around us. They exist to distract us and to discriminate against the people that we love. Some important examples of this are trans people are groomers and pedophiles. This is the lie that adult trans people are dangerous to children. This narrative is used against drag performance, trans folks who work with kids like teachers or counselors or doctors, and also in bathroom arguments. It is completely untrue. Another is that gender identity is fake. People who discriminate often use the term, quote, gender ideology to dismiss gender-expansive identities and to suggest identity is a political belief or a strategy, rather than just who someone is. Affirming practices are often labeled as, quote, radical gender ideology by those who do not practice inclusion of all people. Another misinformation is that trans women harm, quote, real women and girls. This is the claim that trans-inclusive policies put cisgender girls and women at risk of sexual assault or endanger them because trans women are aggressive and dangerous. Another version of this is that trans women harm the advances feminism has made for women and girls because they make women unsafe in a variety of ways and suppress cisgender women and their opportunities in sports, business, or other places. None of this is true and provably false in all areas of society. A final piece of misinformation is that gender-affirming care harms children. This is the view that care, whether familial, social, psychological, or medical, is somehow exploitative and dangerous and only exists to manipulate children or even mutilate them. And it makes children out as victims. This is untrue, and we know that gender-affirming care can be life-saving care. All major medical associations have determined it to be safe, appropriate, and effective. Second, it is important to begin building connections, associations, and interdependence with others as you continue on this journey. Some examples of this might be contact organizations like us here at Transactive at Lewis and Clark to make connections with family support groups or find learning opportunities in our many education and outreach programs. Find out what kinds of affinity groups your children's schools have that your children might be able to join or that you could support. These might include clubs or organizations that are during school or extracurricular. Look at the laws in your state about gender-affirming care and find out where mental and medical health care might be available. Here in Oregon, we're privileged to have many hospital organizations who run comprehensive gender-affirming care departments, including at OHSU, Legacy, and Kaiser. Each of these hospitals have social workers trained to support families of gender-diverse youth. You could also look for family therapists or counselors trained or experienced in care for gender-diverse youth and their families. Finally, look for other social justice and community groups that are inclusive, where you and your family could find affinity. These could include church communities, sports or clubs, or even just friend groups right in your own neighborhood. Third, we encourage you to begin practicing showing up for kids, not just as allies, but as what we call co-conspirators and collaborators. This means going that further step to consider not just what you can be, but what you can do. As Dr. Bettina Love, author and educator, says, a co-conspirator says, what risks am I willing to take? It's saying, I'm going to put my privilege on the line for somebody. As adults, we have privilege our kids don't have, so advocating for them is a way we can be that co-conspirator. Fourth, we like to talk about how we can be part of creating communities of refuge, support, and sustainability. To do this, we want to practice reciprocity, or the mutual exchange of support with each other and with ourselves in our own families. Reciprocity is not necessarily an individual action, but rather it's more of a cultural or group norm we establish within the community we're creating. It's a give and receive model of relationships and requires valuing the common good, not just individual rights. It needs committed community to be sustainable, and it creates a refuge-based community which reproduces reliability and trust, and those are so important for securing and supporting our gender-diverse youth. Fifth and finally, it is important to remind yourself of trans youth joy. Joy can't only be an emotion we feel. In this journey we're on, it must be a practice that we continuously engage in. One way of doing that is looking for the joy being expressed by trans kids everywhere and ways we can support them in that joy. One example of trans youth joy is this wonderful painting called Trans Joy by Jessie Young Paulson. Another is this poem written by 14-year-old Jay Schroeder called You Can Breathe Now. I'd like to read it for you. For so long, I've written my anguish, translated it from pain to prose, so many lines about, live with it, misshapen angel, pull out my lungs, my ribs collapse. But what if I'm tired of living with it? What happens if I can turn my rejoicing into rhyme? Maybe I can write about sewing my pronouns into my jacket-like skin, hanging a pink, white, and blue flag on my wall. My joy can be beautiful too. My pain isn't all the world should get to see. I'm allowed to write with a smile. Run my hand down my new flat chest. I could get used to these scars. Someday, children won't have to feel this way. Someday, all they'll feel will be joy. I can't wait to see what poems they'll write. Like joy, hope is another important part of this journey we're on. We'd like to leave you with this quote from Mariam Kaba. Hope doesn't preclude feelings of sadness or frustration or anger or any other emotion that makes total sense. Hope isn't an emotion, you know. Hope is not optimism. Hope is a discipline. We have to practice it every single day. In this lesson, we've considered the work we want to continue to do around understanding our own identities and biases. We've explored some of the ways misinformation could impact our advocacy for our gender-diverse youth. And we've begun to think about what we want for our own next steps in this journey. Before you move on from this lesson, we'd like to recommend you take about 10 minutes to write a reflection on what you've learned. Some questions you might ask yourself are: how will you be more aware of misinformation and ways you can counter it as an advocate for your gender-diverse youth? What are the steps you want to take next in your journey to grow your understanding of gender diversity? And how will you sustain your own joy and hope along the way? Thank you for joining us in Understanding Gender Diversity in Children and Youth, Lesson 5.